Right, good evening, everyone. It's Monday, the 3rd of March, 2025, and Housing Mill live streams back. We've got the full crew again tonight. That's me. I've got the I've got Mike's. Sorry, just get these. Mike is down.
They'll figure it out.
And oh, I know why that is. Yes, sorry. There's assign to placeholder guest 3. Okay, sorry, I'll just change that so we can see that Mike is actually Mike and Karis is Karis. There we go. But they'll probably change again. So it's been a busy week, so I haven't prepared very much again. But what I was hoping to talk about was a couple of videos that Mike's made, actually, because I watched them today and I thought they looked really interesting. And the first one, if I just dive in there, but stop me, anyone, if you want to talk about anything else. The first one is here. Yes, it's a video called "It's Supposed to Be Adversarial," and I don't know if anybody else has. Well, I hope. Well, actually, quite a lot of people. 156 people have watched this actually, but and I'm one of them. And I thought it was really interesting, Mike. Maybe I thought we could sort of expand on it because it overlaps with the other one I wanted to talk about, which is this video here. Can the council take your children off you if you're homeless? And the common thread they had in them, apart from a sort of malaise on the part of council staff, is in the second video that you were surprised. You recall being surprised at an ombudsman making a finding of fact and believing an applicant who complained about a social worker saying they were going to take the children off them, and you were expecting them to say, "Oh well, there's no direct evidence of this, no recording of it, so I'm afraid I have to take the housing officer's word for it or the social worker," but they didn't. Now, the point, I mean, I may have missed some of the point, because there was quite a lot to deal with, and it's supposed to be adversarial. And maybe you can expand on the sort of adversarial thing and how maybe we could move to a post-adversarial system. But I've subscribed to the audio book version of the Lucifer. Is it the Lucifer Complex, the book, or
Lucifer Effect.
Yes, which looks really interesting, and it one of my sort of constant thoughts that I wish I had more time to investigate when I'm dealing with homelessness and bureaucracy generally is just the capacity of officials to be cruel, to the point where I sometimes wonder if the actual driving force that makes people get up in the morning and go to work is actually some sort of subconscious wish to be cruel to other people, because local authority staff seem to excel in it. An example would be, and I've said this before, if there's a challenge to a council decision, staff will work really, really late writing sort of negative things for their legal team, which they'd never actually spend that time. Well, I mean, they probably are. There's loads of staff who stay up late, I'm sure, trying to house homeless families, but it's just the sheer amount of effort, particularly on the part of reviewing officers. They seem to be easy to sort of go to plumb new depths of sort of unkindness. But this is something that comes up in the where was the experiment, Mike? In the guy that wrote the Lucifer.
So it's Stanford. If you want to save yourself some time, there's a really faithful film about it with just IMDb now. I think it's like 2018 it came out. So, but in terms of the actual kind of like the sequence of events that happened, it's very very well done. And the book kind of goes on, because in the experiment itself there was this bit where the guards got the prisoners to strip down and basically heap on top of each other. And then when he saw the Abu Ghraib photographs come out in Iraq in like 2003, he basically immediately saw the similarities. He ended up, like, the second half of the book is about how he was basically saying that George W. Bush was the yeah, was kind of culpable for the failures of the troops in Iraq. It wasn't just these bad apples. It was like it was all the way up the hierarchy. So yeah, it's kind of, yeah. I mean, yeah, for me, it just kind of like, it really kind of just made that very kind of, that distinction clear, and that kind of, that setting that we're in very clear in terms of the decision we've got to make. Like, do we do something about it or do we not? So it's, yeah, for that reason, I think it's really, yeah, one of maybe the top books I've read in terms of the influence it had on me. So yeah, but the film is also great, and it's just interesting for all sorts of reasons. Actually,
So
the actual science of it's not very good, but it's
if we were
still
to
kind of has this.
summarize it, it's basically the test was to see how easy it was for ordinary people to be persuaded by people they thought were officials to behave in a cruel way. So if you press this button, the person on
So
the other side, yeah.
that was Stanley Milgram's. So this was different. So it's
Oh,
really weird because
sorry. What
they
was?
both went to
Tell me
school.
more.
So Zimbardo and Milgram went to the same primary school. It's really kind of weird coincidence. But basically, so in the Stanford Prison Experiment, they basically got a bunch of 18-year-old guys to volunteer over the summer. Like, they're all students in Stanford, and basically they made the basement of one of their, like, I don't know, science labs or something into like a mock prison. Not very realistic, not very high budget, but they then randomly assigned the different kids into like randomly guards or prisoner roles, and within like hours they were basically committing human rights violations.
Sure
Um,
enough.
and basically Zimbardo was, he must have been pretty young now. He only died like last year, I think. But this was in the 60s. But he basically, he's also part of the problem, because he just watched it. He was like, wow, this is amazing, this is fascinating, whilst these kids were like, yeah, just kind of properly torturing each other. And it was only his missus, he boasted about it to his missus. So his missus came in to have a look, and she was absolutely like, yeah, just completely shocked by it, and that kind of got him to stop the experiment. And then there was some sort of like claims for damages afterwards that I don't think actually won, but yeah. So so there's as I say, they kind of, those two experiments that kind of work really well together. There's obviously this link between. There's also a really good film with the Milgram experiment with Peter Sarsgaard in it, which again is very faithful to what happened. So yeah, both worth watching. I don't know if there's, I'm not sure if they're free on anything at the moment.
And these
But
kids in the one that you've correctly identified, they actually knew it was a test, didn't they? It wasn't as if
yeah,
they.
yeah,
So that
yeah.
makes
No,
it worse in a way, doesn't it?
yeah. So that, yeah, they were never like told to be cruel or anything like that. Just, they would basically say, look, this is the setup. Your guards, you get on with it. And again, you have that kind of interesting dynamics where you've got one or two guards who like sort of push the limits of what they can get away with. You've also got some guards who don't want to be part of it, and then you've got prisoners who, I mean, basically, yeah, I mean, it was shocking what happened, like how they, yeah, the fact it was an experiment, they all kind of somehow thought it was real. Like, they didn't think, oh, I can just opt out, this isn't a real prison. They kind of completely were kind of yeah, sort of engulfed by it. But yeah, no, it's, as I say, the science of it's not good, because it's not actually a scientific experiment, but it's kind of obviously got kind of a lot of
It's an
relevance to
interesting
modern day.
phenomenon.
Yeah.
But what lessons? I mean, jumping back to the sort of world we're talking about here, and your experiences as working in a housing department, did you find that resonated with those sorts of experiments, that you could see that people who probably, I mean, I always think people go and work in a homeless person's unit out of a sense of, I mean, I suppose they do it for a job at the end of the day, but if they had to choose between that and other jobs, they may be because they've actually got some good motives. They think, I'd like to help homeless people. And then you find that quickly that gets corrupted and turned inside out.
Yeah, I think it's, so that it also kind of really interesting when you compare it to the post office investigation team, because essentially they had this remit, go and convict people, and so that's what they did. They lost sight of, and yeah, they lost sight of right and wrong. I'm echoing a lot there. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but
Nope.
yeah, they lost sight of like right and wrong. They basically just, so I think people working in a homeless person's unit kind of somehow kind of take on the idea that, yeah, the job is to find people not in priority, the job is to find people intentionally homeless, and they kind of, so they lose sight of what you're actually there to do, which is to assist people who are in need. So yeah, and I think, yeah, the kind of differences, certainly working in Bedford Borough Council, some were, I think, sadists, some were nice people, And I think the majority of the housing officers, had they had decent managers, they wouldn't have done anything wrong. They'd have kind of, they've been good workers, but they had this kind of oversight from these kind of individuals who were just dodgy, in my opinion. And kind of it corrupted the whole sort of essence of the team, what they were really there for. But I think that is common amongst lots of different councils. I think, and I think the kind of the Stamford Prison experiment would suggest that any time you put humans in a situation where they've got power, and you basically don't have any kind of ethical like limits, you don't tell them what the limits are, they'll go and do ridiculous things and lose sight of what they're about.
And do you think that the situation in housing departments, I mean, could be resolved and it could work properly? I've always thought the problem with the housing departments is that there's a secret agenda. Well, it's not so secret, but it's the one that nobody says out loud, which is that they've only got a certain amount of stock, and therefore they've got a rights-based system they've got to manage, which says that if you are in priority need, etc., you're entitled to a home. But they know that there's only a certain number of them, so they're trying to sort of restrict it by essentially gatekeeping, and they end up in an adversarial relationship with the applicants, because it's sort of, how can we stop these people getting housed rather than how can we house them, which is worrying. But the other thing, without dwelling on that too much, is that the other thing you were talking about in the video was the corruptibility of charities, or the tendency of charities to sort of fall over and not do what they're supposed to do, and also the timidity of those running charities and their inclination to, access requests that I've made, because they didn't even want the hassle of the subject, how great it is to be involved in charities. And she's saying she doesn't work for one, she's just a rich person that has her charities and she organises parties and stuff. And there's sort of the message is that this charities thing is completely corrupt, and which is pretty unfair, because there's lots of people who do good stuff in charities. But I don't know, what do you think is the problem there, Mike? I'm not asking you to sort of answer a very deep question, but you must have pondered what the cause of, where the corrupt, what the sort of what generates the uselessness.
Cheeseface just saying I've got a terrible echo as well, so I don't know.
Oh,
Could you,
have I
if you
got?
mute whilst I'm? Well, no, I think you're fine. I think it's just me. So if you mute whilst I'm talking, then it might. I just see if that works out. Cheeseface, if you let us know if that works, I think. But yeah, I
Well,
think
you
in
want me
answer.
to mute you?
No, if you mute you, because I think that's what it's basically bouncing back between
Oh,
us.
hang on, then I'll mute me and then see.
Yeah, we'll see if it makes a difference.
Let's just find my microphone.
But yeah, I think
Sorry,
so.
if I go to my.
I think to answer your question, which I'm not entirely sure, but I think charity workers burn themselves out working really hard, and they think that because they're burning themselves out, there is no kind of like scrutiny or any kind of accountability. And I'm not saying they're doing wrong things. I'm saying like the outcomes they're getting are not actually outcomes related to ending homelessness. So yeah, I think I basically think charity workers stop analysing whether the charity they're working for is doing a good job, rather than and so I think that's part of the problem. And as I say, because they grind themselves into the ground, they get very defensive. If you criticise them, they're like very, very defensive indeed, and they can't kind of hear what you're actually saying, which can often be there's a better way to actually work. So but hopefully I'm not echoing there. But that's my initial thoughts. But I don't know. That's just me. So I don't know. Shannon, Kara's got any ideas?
Yeah, if I can.
Hold on a sec, Shannon. Just there's some. I think there's some problems with the stream.
Oh, maybe that's what it
now
was.
they're saying that they can't see anyone.
I hope I didn't switch to.
Sorry if I just
stop the stream. Let me just see. It should still be going. No, it's still broadcasting, as it were. Can anybody else hear? Because Tiff said Tiff can't hear anything. I'll just see if I can see what's happening on the actual YouTube live.
So someone's just said it's working fine.
Oh, good. Okay. So Yeah, so that was that video. I'll just move on. If everyone can hear all right, and the echo is not too bad.
Can I just add something in, sorry?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Just like on the whole, why does this happen? I think Mike's right on what he's saying, and I think part of the issue is also a societal issue where we stigmatize and dehumanize people who are experiencing homelessness so much. I'm echoing now, aren't I, guys? Yeah.
Not for me, but I guess I wouldn't hear it. But
Okay, I'll keep going then, and hopefully it's not too bad for those watching. But we dehumanize and sort of stigmatize people who are homeless to such an extent that our standards in the sector are so low when it comes to them. And so we basically, like, how many times do we hear it where people are just grateful that a worker's not a dick to them, and they're just grateful that someone's nice to them? It doesn't register that they've got rights or that, and charity workers, perhaps not even intentionally, but they get swept up in this mindset of like, oh no, I've done a really good job today because I gave this person, you know, a mocha instead of a coffee, and that's what they really wanted, rather than sort of seeing that bigger picture. And or they're like, oh, I spent 45 minutes chatting to my client today, and I only had half an hour booked for them, so I'm doing a really good job because I spent an extra 15 minutes listening. And I think because our standards are so low, and I think that comes from sort of dehumanizing people who are experiencing homelessness, and also we reduce them to just their experience of homelessness. So we forget that they were a whole other person with life experiences, qualifications, you know, family, friends, whatever it may be, before they experience homelessness. We forget all of that and we go, no, you're a rough sleeper now. You're a victim of domestic abuse now. You're a poor person who can't afford their rent now. Like, whatever the situation is, we boil them down to just their homelessness. And we then don't put the energy as a sector and as a society because we don't care. And again, I wonder if one of the reasons we sort of don't care as a society is we're in a like catch-22 position where so many people are like, oh, I wouldn't become homeless because I've got family and friends who would support me. And then other people are like, well, everyone's 1 month away from being homeless, so, you know. And so actually homeless people can't win because no one is sort of being able to relate or like to be able to sort of build that solidarity with the cohort of people. And again, different forms of homelessness are so different to each other. There's no sort of common factor, and and often the anger from homeless people is misplaced. So yeah, that's just a small rant, and I could go on for hours, but I'm going to stop now because you were moving on. Sorry, Will.
no, that's okay. I think there's a tendency. I mean, this is sort of amateur sort of sociology, but there's a tendency to sort of put people into us and them groups, and very quickly, and as the service users often get stuck into the them with the us. They're sort of dysfunctional and lesser people because of what they need. Um, it reminds me. There's a story my grandfather told me that he was born. He was born in 1899. He was just old enough to serve in the First World War in the Navy, and he said that when they marched off to get on the ship to go and fight in the Navy, everyone was cheering them and shouting, "Oh, you brave boys! Give one to the Kaiser for us," and all this sort of stuff. But then it was just at the end of the war, and a few months later they were back and they were getting off the ship, and everyone was going, "Oh, what are we going to do with you, lazy devils?" And he said it was very funny how they changed their attitude towards us so quickly. And I think that's the tendency to see, oh, it's that you get put into the them box, and people are hostile towards you. But that's my little story from the past. Now, moving on to the other video is this one here. Can councils take your children off you if you're homeless? But before I dive into that one, what I'll do is I'll just go back to the comments and just get some feedback from. So I'll just go through these. We got oh, they're not appearing now. I was feeling pleased with myself. Just before we came on, I set up the placeholder for the. That's interesting. It's not. It should be here, but oh yeah, here it is. Sorry, there we go. So I've set it up. So there's B Smith saying hello. Hello to you, B Smith, and Tiff as well. Hello, Cheeseface, and us, and oh yeah, this is where we get through the video. I'll just here we go, Martin. Hello to you. I'll just make you a bit like this box fit. I'm sorry, I thought I'd sorted all this out before I started the show, so it would all fit seamlessly. So Martin said their objectives somewhere along the line go from intention to house to an intention not to house under any circumstances. The driver is usually budget or KPIs. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with that. And the trouble is, isn't it, that you've got a group of people. You can either become a manager and continue your career path internally, which involves sort of drinking the Kool-Aid and not helping people and not accepting that there's a problem, that there isn't enough resources, because you're not going to get promoted for criticising the government or whatever, or you can give up. So yeah, I agree. Then we've got okay, some more stuff on the Echo, and then I won't put all those comments on there. So actually, I think most of it is just about the technical issues. But thank you for that. Cheeseface has just moved council and was in my layperson mind. Should be a very easy transfer. It's been very difficult because HO are so used to doing it. Yeah, should be easier because they're used to doing it. But there we go. Video idea: what you see homelessness can do at a discount around London Tower Bridge. Well, yeah, I guess it's slightly outside our remit, but I'd quite like to know. I mean, there used to be. I remember. This is going back a long way before probably most of you remember, but in the old days there used to be unemployment benefit and supplementary benefit, and you got a UB40, which probably most people know that's where the name of the group came from. But there was lots of stuff in the early 80s that was sort of free with a UB40, and I used to be able to go swimming in Stratford on Romford Road. There was a swimming pool you could just go free if you had a UB40, which was very nice. But I don't know many places that actually do. Anyone know any free?
I think you get like concessions, like concession rates for certain things, but I think I think the kind of the rhetoric against people and benefits is so kind of severe now that like no one wants to advertise the fact they might give a discount rate. I just think it's like it's kind of almost seen as poison, so they just don't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, you'd think that they could all let people in for free if they're on universal credit at certain times of the day. There must be quiet times on a sort of Monday morning or something when the zoo isn't too busy. But what do I know? I haven't been there for a long time. And we've got, if they made being homeless a nice experience, I suppose everyone would do it. Well, I guess so. The homeless experience needs to be terrible to keep the middle classes happy to go to work. Yes. Although it does raise the question. Sorry, Mike.
Sorry, there's one from Martin just above that.
Oh, sorry.
I thought it was pretty cool.
Sorry, Martin. You should have seen the look on the charity workers' faces when I offered them some professional consultancy while staying at a hostel. Now that's really interesting, isn't it? Because they say, "Who do you think you are?" Sort of. Yeah, that's a very good point. Maybe you can tell us what your what you would, if you could do an elevator pitch for what your consultancy would have been. That would be very interesting to know as well. So to go back to Cheeseface's point, I mean that's I guess I always wonder when you see the news it says homelessness this, homelessness that. I mean there's usually then some picture of somebody with a sort of please help written on a piece of cardboard. But then there's the whole concept of homeless in the wider sense, which we don't tend to talk about as much. Well, we do here because we're talking about homeless applicants, because you are homeless if you're in temporary accommodation, really. I mean, you haven't, that's not a home. But there's a whole, I mean, it's getting to the point where there's a whole level of society that's living in this horrible experience, full stop. I mean, I said the other day, I had a client whose son had behaviour, it was an antisocial behaviour case, and it involved her son who was making a nuisance of himself somewhere. And she said he's been in temporary accommodation all his life. And I thought, geez, that's terrible, isn't it? And what the impact of that on people in society is going to be, that just being treated like that and seeing your parents being treated like that. So yes, and then
I mean, I'd say on that, like, it's got to just provoke such an anger which like will last probably for the rest of your life. If you've been dealt with unjustly by various professionals, whatever, then that surely has got to just kind of stick with you in a very like deep rooted emotional response to the world. I mean, probably won't say more about that on this stream, but I think just that kind of that's kind of part of the damage that people don't really kind of take into account.
yes. Sorry, was somebody about to say something?
And there's no wonder why like so many people have got like mental health issues and they don't want to work or they can't work, and like there's some cause there where actually people aren't trusting the system, and so why would they want to give back into that system? Like, and also it causes mental health issues, but they're like, oh, mental health's gone up. Well, yeah, so is TA and so is like homelessness and everything else. So you're not making this link. And look, I'm not a statistician, so I probably shouldn't be making that link either. But in my head, there's a link.
But also, how are you supposed to have faith in a system that hasn't, when you've got lived experience, you're supposed to have faith in a system that hasn't worked for you? Or you know people who are seen people who go through it, you haven't got faith in the system from the outset.
Yeah, I suppose that's another thing, going back to how when we were talking earlier about the sort of institution, like, well, built-in sort of defectiveness into homeless persons units, that they will inevitably go wrong. I suppose ways you can control that is by having management and people held up to sort of scrutiny and made accountable, but also, I suppose, having more of a sort of service user input to monitor it, to give feedback.
Why don't they have feedback and like focus groups on what's happened afterwards?
Yeah.
Or talk. There's no aftercare either. So like if they house someone, they're like usually an unfurnished house, and they've just given them the keys, made them sign papers, send all over their information, and then they're supposed to carry on with their lives and then be grateful for being given the bare minimum.
Yeah, it's a big problem, and even despite the Homelessness Reduction Act, which is supposed to provide, what people need, what support they need, but that seems to be just ignored at the moment, largely. Martin's added a bit more. I used to run a communications agency, having worked in PR and comms for 15 years before becoming homeless. They were struggling with internal, external comms, so I offered to do a free analysis. The second and last time I offered was when they were struggling with implementing their drugs policy, and it wasn't the policy that needed to change, it was the communication of it to residents. That sounds like you should be a guest on the show here, Martin, and come along and join us one week and talk some more. But that all sounds very interesting. So I'll just come on to the thing we were going to talk about was this, where's it gone? Yeah, that one. Sorry, got it. Right, so this is the second video Mike's done. I would recommend watching this. Can councils take your children off you if you're homeless? Now this is, I don't know if anybody, God, it's so long since I watched Kathy Come Home, but I can't remember what happens in it. But there is some, I think the children do get taken off her. Can anyone remember?
I couldn't face watching it. I bought it and I was like, I just did me too depressing, so I never watched it.
It certainly is, yeah. I mean, I haven't watched that. The recent Mike, the one that he did about the guy on benefits, Daniel or something like that.
Daniel Blake.
Yeah,
I
I
didn't watch
thought
that either. That was also too depressing.
I'll end up doing something terrible. So yeah, what Mike was saying in this video is the question: can they take your children off you if you're homeless? And the background to that is that it's very often it's not said. Well, it is said out loud, but it isn't said really clearly, and it's very rarely said in writing. But there is a constant sort of threat there a lot of the time that if you don't play the ball, then if you don't play ball, then your children will be taken into care. It comes up in a couple of instances. The one that Mike mentions is where somebody has been given an offer of accommodation, and the housing officer says, if you don't accept it, we may take your children off you. And another one you get is if you have gone through the homeless route and you've been found intentionally homeless or something, and you approach children's services to ask for help, you get told, "Oh, all we can do is take your children into care. Is that what you want?" And that's designed to sort of get you to turn around and run out the door. Which and another thing, it's sad to say, but it's true. I think that when you there's a threat that we'll report you to social services, which sort of goes back into the popular subconscious of years of sort of social workers uh, being negative forces and people not wanting to have anything to do with them. So just the thought of having to deal with social workers and the threat of them taking your children off you is enough to sort of uh, be a deterrent. But the answer to the question that Mike's raised there is no. Oh, I mean, well, they can take your children off you if you're homeless, but put another way, they can't take your children off you just because you're homeless. I mean, it could be that you're homeless and you happen to be doing something else which would justify taking your kids off you, but not because of that. And of course, the other example I'd give of where this threat is made or it's not dealt with properly is it's automatic when somebody with children is found intentionally homeless or a negative decision is made. Sometimes you get it when they treat their duties as discharged after refusing an offer. They'll say at the end of the letter, we have notified children's services, which is, and it doesn't go in, it's literally maybe a line which doesn't explain why, but it's left to you to fill in the blank and think, oh my God, they've reported me and I should expect to knock on the door and they're going to take my children away. And I did have a case once, and I think it was something like that, where, yeah, this really did happen. Yeah, this is how it went. There's a client of mine who was a refugee from, I think it was Somalia or Ethiopia, and he'd come over, and they're really heavily traumatized people. And his wife had joined him after a few months after he got here, and they obviously where they'd come from, they had a terrible mistrust of authorities. So he was given an offer of accommodation which he thought was unsuitable. I think it was another of these offers. They were in Walthamstow, so you can probably guess they got offered somewhere over the sort of north of the wall, as it were. And the wife overheard a conversation with a social worker or a housing officer saying, if you don't, doing the usual, if you don't accept this offer, we're going to take your children into care. And she overheard this conversation and said to the husband, what on earth's going on? What have you exposed our children to? I think they said one son, actually. What have you exposed our son to? That I've come over here and now I find they're going to take him into care. And so she went back to France, and that was the end of their relationship. And it was a really terrible thing. So, I mean, it's a really terrible thing to say to people, we're going to take your children and we've reported you to social services with all of what that entails, or worse, we're going to take the children. But the good news, yeah, it's getting pretty bad news so far, but the good news is they're not allowed to do this. And I'll just explain why, because one of the reasons I was interested in the video is because I looked into this question myself and I did a blog post on it a few years ago now. Must be getting on for 10 years ago. Can't quite see when it was. Oh no, December 11 years ago. December 2014, so just over 10. And this was written in response to that point. The social worker says the only thing they can do to help us is to take our children into care. And I won't read it out, but I went through why that's wrong. because they can't take your children into care unless it's an emergency where the police could sort of, if the police had reports that was sort of children in crisis somewhere, they could turn up and take the children off you. But if you went to children's services and said, "I'm homeless, can you help me?" They couldn't take your children into care, or if they did, they'd be breaking the law quite seriously. And what it says here is the long and the short of it is that in order to take children into care, they have to get a care order and they have to go through a particular procedure, and they have to justify it to a judge. So it's if they went to a judge and said, they refused an offer of accommodation, so we're going to take the children into care, the judge would hopefully throw the book at them. Not just because it's an inhumane rationale for taking the children off them, but it's the cost of foster. I mean, I hope I don't sound cynical, but the cost of fostering children, which is what you'd be doing, or putting them in the care system. I mean, I've heard it's as expensive as sending children to Eton, which raises other questions. But so the judge would say, "What on earth are you doing? Why don't you just give them somewhere decent to live, and then the parents can look after the children?" But if you read here, the ethos of the Children Act is that a child will be in need if they're homeless. So you could say, "Oh, that's grounds for children's services getting involved," but that's just for providing support. And it says that section 17. Part of section 17 says that the priority has to be to keep families with their parents, children with their parents. Sorry. So the good news is they can't take your children into care.
There's a bit somewhere I read where it basically it's kind of spelled out the principle that you don't punish the kids because of what the parents have done. I'd read it and then I lost it, but I'm going to find it again at some point. But it's just I thought it was really helpful to kind of read that.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah, I mean, you don't punish them for it.
And it's not in the best interest of the child.
No, that's the guiding principle, isn't it? That what's in the best interest of the child. There were a couple of cases that Mike mentioned on the case, because the question would be, well, if they're supposed to do something different to take the children into care, what can they do, or what should they do? And that would be in a situation where you go to children's services because housing have shut the door on you, or they've done that thing where they've made the referral to children's services, which, by the way, in the letter that they send you, it should explain properly, we've made a referral to children's services because they may be able to assist you in obtaining support, including accommodation, under section 17 of the Children Act. That's something very important that should be said. But if you went there, you're going to have a couple of problems to start with. One is that you may get this ingrained approach, which is to try, which I think is just to try and scare people away. But if they can't scare you away, then they may genuinely not know what they're doing, because a lot of social workers haven't been trained to deal with provision of housing. And I could probably do a whole show on the problems that arose, because where the government have done this hostile environment and they've excluded more and more groups of people with children from mainstream housing, they've fallen back on children's services. And that's meant that children's services have had huge numbers of families to house. If you think that the things we were talking about earlier in housing departments were bad, you've got to see it to believe it, just how bad the social workers were. Absolute inhumanity in many cases, where they would try to sort of make out the children, the mother, the way that they would always fight it was to say, you've got loads of resources and you could house yourself tomorrow yourself, but it's just you're trying it on and you want to get one over on the system. And that's quite appealing to sort of Daily Mail readers and people who become judges, I'm afraid. But there's no such thing as poverty. There's just people trying it on. And in my day, you could join the army, and if you were poor, and that would be the road to redemption. But sorry, I'm digressing. So then they would basically try and do these ridiculous assessment reports, which showed. I had one where they showed that the mother had gone shopping in Marks and Spencer's for some food. And they actually said this in the assessment report, that this showed a level of sort of decadence and financial irresponsibility, which could only come from somebody with massive resources which were hidden away. And one poor child had an iPad that was bought for them before they became homeless, but it was seen that the mother had resources and could buy an iPad. Anyway, so what they're supposed to do is do an assessment and help you. And but they're stuck, because if a child is homeless,
It's like instead they do assessment and judge you.
yes, and the only way they can get around it is to say that the child isn't in need. And this comes up with the Jalal case that Mike mentions in the video. So if you accept that the children are in need, which inevitably you have to if they're homeless, because they're facing destitution, then you have to help them. So the only way you can get around it is say, well, they're not in need. But how do you do that? There was a case called MN and Hackney, where, which I think was in 2016, where the family. This is a problem you get if you've a lot of people who've been overstayers, spent years in London or somewhere, where after their visas expired or something, they get used to sort of living off the grid and keeping quiet. And they have people who support them but don't want to be known to have supported them. And people get very paranoid. So they don't particularly want to give details of their finances to social services. And there was a family that didn't cooperate. And so the court, Hackney was the council, they said, oh, well, the fact that you're not cooperating means that we think you've got resources and you just don't want to tell us about them. And so we don't believe anything you're saying, and your children aren't in need. And the judge said, yeah, that's all right. You can do that, because it's a decision that you can rationally reach based on the family's refusal to cooperate. And of course, this was a very dangerous decision, because it led to social workers falsely accusing families of not cooperating. So they'd say, could you give us your current bank account statements for the last 3 months? And they'd give them. And then when you got there, they'd say, you haven't brought your deposit account and your savings account until you didn't ask for them. Yes, we did. And then they'd record that. He reluctantly brought his other accounts after we caught him, and so it was all about credibility. And that unfortunately happened I think probably something like that happened in the Jalal case, that because very few people are going to just say, I'm not going to cooperate at all. But as long as you can say, yes, I am cooperating, and I'm happy to tell you anything you want to know within reason, it's very difficult for not to assist. But the problem is, if you haven't got a lawyer, and of course the council will have lawyers and a very large budget to pay them with, you're in a difficult position, because even finding the courtroom in the High Court is difficult enough, let alone doing anything in there. So I hope that answers. Well, I hope that sheds some light. Is that basically they shouldn't tell you that they're going to take your children into care, and I think everybody should complain about it if they do, because it is a very unpleasant thing to threaten, not least because the children might hear it and think it's going to happen.
One thing, Will, that I just want to add into it is that so housing teams aren't supposed to make the referral to children's services unless they've got the consent of the family. So it's not supposed to be something that happens without some sort of consultation. Now, if the family refused, but it went on to be kind of serious concerns about the needs of the child, then they would refer anyway. But there should be a conversation. They shouldn't just be getting a letter saying we referred you to children's services. There should be a conversation first.
Yeah. It's tricky because they're both bad situations. If they refer you to children's services without telling you, I mean, that's bad on a number of levels, like, disclosing information about you and stuff. But it's also, I mean, the problem is nobody probably does anything with the referral anyway, just sits in an in tray somewhere. And the thing is, one thing they do in the letter sometimes is they say, if you want help from children, if you want further help, contact children's services. But getting through to children's services in this post-COVID age, where it's difficult to even, I mean, I had one the other day where it is happening. Say in Ealing, the client went to try and make a homeless application, was told she wasn't allowed in the building, and she could only do it online or over the telephone, which is difficult because then you're waiting for days. I mean, if you ring the telephone number, you're on hold for hours and you get through to an answering machine or something. If you do it on the website, you could be waiting 3 days for a reply, and then you just get an email saying, sorry, we're not going to help you. So it's really difficult to just access that support as well. I'll just go back to the comments. I mean, the answer, I mean, maybe what we should do if we have more time is just to a non-lawyer's guide to accessing council services. I guess it's all just about finding the right email addresses and forms on websites, and then knowing who to complain to if you don't get a fast response. And it can work. I mean, Mike, you've shown that complaining and stuff can work if you do that sort of email to the chief executive and all that stuff. But it takes a long time to build up the knowledge of who's who, doesn't it? So just back to the questions here. Where did I get to? I think we're going to be. Oh, there's quite a few. Sorry. I think it's this one here is got. Sorry, there's loads of comments coming while I've been talking away. So I'll try and go through them as quickly as I can and get them all in. A friend of mine received relief duty to move to TA. The LHA is way lower than the rents. LHA 1400, actual rent 2400. After 50 days plus, if they can't find a place, they may dismiss them. Any advice? What do you? I mean, my first view. Anybody else jump in? People won't have to just listen to my voice, but I think that would be unsuitable, wouldn't it? If they move them into temporary accommodation, which they can't afford, it would be.
Yeah, you challenge it because it's unsuitable. I just wonder if, because in one sense the relief duty is separate from TA, so it's kind of like I think you've got to deal with them separately. I wonder if there's been like they're already in TA and they've been offered like long-term accommodation, because the LHA doesn't apply to temporary accommodation either. It only applies to standard private rented accommodation. So essentially that would be, yeah, I mean they can't discharge their duty into unaffordable accommodation. That's the argument. I guess the kind of what the course of action would be to accept it, and then challenge it. And it should be pretty straightforward to challenge in that situation because it will be so obvious that it will be unaffordable.
Yes, you could challenge it, and because it's relief duty, you'd have to challenge it by way of judicial review. Well, and I suppose you could write to the council and say, I can't afford this. But if you wanted to actually legally challenge it, it would be by way of judicial review proceedings. But the alternative would be just to pay what you can. And if they say that I mean, that might cause yourself problems if they could terminate it and you find yourself out on the street, which sounds like it's possible if they're giving you something as unsuitable as that. But I hope that answers it. I mean, the advice is it's not suitable, so you shouldn't put up with it and challenge it. Make a complaint probably to start with. So that's that one. And we've got X has 2 teenage kids, have been homeless their entire lives. Social services says there's studies that show children in bad accommodation suffer greatly and underachieve. Spurs few on to achieve greatly. Yeah, I guess so. But it really does cause a lot of problems. I'm not sure. Sorry, Martin, you probably posted that while just after I said something there. Was it the threatened
about having kids removed?
Yeah. I think it's happening all over the place. Unfortunately, we've got sorry, but would if they said that I would X, Y, and Z to X, Y, Z, if you know what I mean. I'm afraid I don't quite know what you mean there. Am I missing something? What? I would X, Y, and Z.
I can't even see that message.
Oh, can't you? Oh. Can you do it? Anyone else see it? Have I been reading out messages which no one can see?
I can't see them.
The other ones I could, but I just wonder if YouTube's basically picking up on it like spam or something. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
So it's only showing you.
Sorry about that.
I can't see it.
So I've got
all messages lined up, but yeah.
Can you see this one? This is from Cheeseface.
Yes, that's there's a sequence of posts you put up there, or he I actually don't know if it's he or she.
In fact, they did report 3 times threshold was not met, so they made up lies about drug abuse. Luckily, the other council social services were normal, conducted an assessment and found the referral. Oops. There's probably a bit more to that to be unfounded. Yeah, I think actually you may get that with social workers, that if you're dealing with the actual social workers that deal with children outside the housing environment situation, I mean, they're probably unaffected by the sort of brutality that creeps in if they're getting involved in sort of housing situations. Because I've found that once you got through to one of those social workers, they'd be very nice. And also in legal terms, if you got a judge from the family division rather than the King's Bench division, which deals with judicial reviews normally, you'd get a completely different approach, a child-centered approach, thinking in a humane way. So coming back,
There's quite a few follow-up comments from Cheeseface on this. I think there's a question coming up as well about it.
okay. So I just quickly go through. The made a complaint to council and made a referral on X behalf. Recently took it to LGSO, who dismissed it despite a full assessment from social services in X favour. Okay. I'm sorry to hear what happened to person X. I'm not surprised. Are you aware of social services having forced adoption targets? No, I'm not aware. Is anyone else aware of that? That sounds pretty sinister.
I think that they'll avoid it because it's so expensive if they can.
Yeah. No, not any more information you've got on that would be interesting. Why doesn't? Here we go. This is more of a dry legal question. Why doesn't having cousins and aunt BCP for 7 years count as local connection? When moved from Surrey, it's understood the BCP council have their rules, but surely this person should be made an exception. Sorry, everybody. Can anyone help me with what BCP stands for?
It's Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. I think the issue here is whether the person's legally homeless or not. Because if they're accommodated and they're not legally homeless and they've applied under Part 6, then Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole apply their local definition of local connection onto it. And I would imagine that, I mean, I've not read BCP's policy, but I'm going to guess that they don't include like aunts or uncles or anything in that.
No,
That's the issue.
That's the simple answer to that one, isn't it? That it has to be a close relative, and cousins and aunts aren't close
So
enough.
under Part 7, it could be. It just depends on the quality of the contact. But as I say, under Part 6, I doubt it even mentions aunts and uncles. It'll be stricter. So the issue the person's got is, had they approached when they were homeless, they would have had a much different definition of local connection applied to them. It'd be the same wording, so they'll still use the word local connection. But as I say, BCP will have its own local policy under Part 6, which may not include any sort of extended family at all. Whereas the national definition under Part 7, the homelessness definition, if that's the best way to say it, is it can include aunts and uncles if there are sufficiently close links in terms, I think, wordings, in terms of close contacts, frequency contacts, stuff like that.
Okay, there's a couple more comments about social services stealing children to meet forced adoption targets. I'll skip those if you don't mind, because I haven't got much I can say, and but unless anyone else wants to have a chat about that, but I don't know anything about it, and I'll just leave it. So here we go. Here's a court case. UOV Borough of Redbridge High Court ruled that placing a homeless mother and her 3 children in transient hotel accommodation without cooking facilities or sanitation violated. Yeah, well, it would do, wouldn't it? Unless, of course, and Redbridge are bad at this, unless the hotel was owned by Redbridge, which you may think, well, do councils own hotels? But they own accommodation which might otherwise be like a bed and breakfast. It doesn't. It has shared facilities and things. But I think if it doesn't have any cooking or sanitation facilities, I can't see how anyone could say it was suitable. So I'll have to study that decision. I'm surprised that it even got to court, really. But it just shows Redbridge sent some barrister along to court, presumably, to argue that cooking and sanitation facilities weren't part of a suitable accommodation.
Giles Peaker was properly scathing about Redbridge, and that it's worth reading it. He was like, because I don't know the backstory, but they basically made an unlawful decision, and they essentially made it again unlawfully for the same reasons, I think.
Is that a recent case then? I mean, I'm.
Yeah, it's like last summer it came out. I'm
right.
googling it now. It's like August. So this went up August 2024. So yeah, just trying to it happened in 2023, sorry, but it was published here in 2024, I think.
Oh yeah, if we go to here it is. So it's on the Nearly Legal site if anyone's interested. I am. So thank you for reminding me about this. I'd forgotten about it. So yeah, it's nice to see the courts actually getting tough with councils about suitability. Unfortunately, it's quite common for them to sort of take the view that there's such little about that people have to be grateful for what they get. So I'll just go back to here. Yeah. I'll just leave that if that's okay, Chief, because I don't know enough about the specifics. ZRRV. Oh, well, yeah, I can blow my own trumpet here because I'm pretty sure that's my case actually. And yes, they did, and that's the case. I think we've mentioned it in other cases where Bexley found a family to be intentionally homeless, and then when they went to children's services, they were treated with contempt, really, and they were offered two weeks in Manchester in a hostel without any assessment or thought of what would happen at the end of the 2 weeks. And I think that was in combined discharge of Section 17 and the Section 190 duty. So they lost on that. And the good news was the family in that case managed to find some private sector accommodation in the area, and the council gave them a deposit and rent in advance because they didn't want any more litigation. But it was a nasty case, that one. And then another one where they sent one of the best barristers in London, housing barristers, to defend their case, which I'm pleased to say they still lost. But it shows the resources they have to try and fight anything. So I think I'm going to just try and whiz through these if that's okay, because we're getting towards the end. Oh, that's interesting. This one, oh yeah, I have a few tricks on that front. Have had to use many different creative ways of submitting homeless applications letters. Oh, yeah, well, good on you there. Has everyone checked the 3 lines at the top, then clicked all messages? You have to see all messages. Oh, is that?
So there was a retracted comment in there, which I think some people are responding to.
Oh,
but, yeah. So I think that kind of thread probably won't make any sense now.
Okay, I'm gonna just whiz through. Oh yeah, sorry, somebody's saying about that. Okay, here we go. William Flack Law Channel Social Services choose certain experts that they pay to write falsified, exaggerated reports in favour of social services. Psychologist was caught at it. Yeah, well, this is unfortunately a very common problem in the legal world. Is experts, and I use the quotes as well, who will, for money, will use their expertise to just say whatever somebody wants them to say, with the sort of "Hello, I'm an expert. This is what's happening here."
I did a video a couple of weeks ago about the sort of modern slavery stuff. So I did it with Lynn. So I worked on a case before. So Lynn basically challenges that sort of stuff with social services. So the whole kind of fabricated induced illness stuff, like she's kind of done a lot of cases, and it was spooky because I had a case which I brought to her where there's like a single mum, 3 kids, 2 of them had autism, and essentially like the schools and all the social services were getting really difficult with her and just kind of basically setting her up to kind of try and remove the kids. And Lynn basically predicted everything they would then say. It was honestly spooky, but we got it sorted out in the end because we just challenged it and said, kind of like the whole setup that the professionals, with the GP as well, were doing, were trying to suggest that she wasn't making good decisions around the care of the kids, and she absolutely was. But it was Lynn would have a lot to say about that kind of thing in terms of the number of professionals out there who just kind of get themselves set into this way where it's almost like they think they kind of believe they believe what they're saying. It's kind of like it's completely unfounded.
Yeah, I mean, if I haven't ranted about the Birmingham Six today, so I just mentioned in that case, expert evidence was at the heart of the wrongful conviction, where a Home Office expert claimed that swabbing the fingers of the men showed they'd all been handling gunpowder, when the test he was using could get the same effect off a sausage roll on the train. So it took years to discredit him and show that it was nonsense. But yeah, sorry, he turned out to be best mates with one of the main police officers. Anyway, sorry, that's it. Just it's terrible. I mean, I think the whole thing with expert evidence should be changed, and they should be appointed by the courts or something, because you just can't. It's just so corrupted, and even the whole concept. Because when we as litigators talk about experts, and they'll say, "Oh, what does your expert say is different from what our expert says?" And it's just makes a mockery of the whole process if the expert is just basically a gun for hire, rather than telling them what the actual truth is. So I think that is about it for now. If anybody, do any of you guys want to say anything else? Okay. As again, I say it every week. I'll try and make a more structured session. But I personally enjoy these sort of just chats and see where the chat takes us, and everyone's participating. But one of these days, what I'd like to do is do what Mike does, but is put videos out there before, and then you can watch the video, and we can have a chat about those, which would cut down on me just sort of doing a monologue. So thank you everybody for taking part tonight, and thanks for everyone who's watched it. And I'm pleased to say, last time I looked, I was up to 110 followers. So I'm getting towards. I haven't really got a target, but it's nice to see that. And so if you, I can just say that the usual thing. If anybody's out there, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, so that I can keep my morale up. So keep doing this, and see you all on Thursday. Yeah. Okay. Bye.